So thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to run through our P6-QA tool. And this tool really helps you hunt down problems in your P6 schedules, looks for deficiencies, any gaps in the way it's been put together. I'm Nicole Jardin. I'm the founder and CEO of Emerald, and I'm joining you today from Calgary. And as I mentioned, I've got Sue Vermelia and James Andrade with us here. Sue's in Wyoming and James is in Calgary. So let's touch on why we built this P6-QA tool. So what we found was we had a reasonable number of clients that would ask us to come in and critique their schedules. So we had numerous engagements like that every single year. And although of course it was work and it was interesting work, it was also frustrating because we had a small amount of time to look at the schedule. We didn't necessarily know that much about the project. And it always felt like we couldn't do a thorough job. Well, not always, but in many cases. So that's why we started to build P6-QA. We wanted a tool that would allow people to critique their own schedules right within the P6 program and not have to use a bunch of expensive third-party software tools that only one or two people in the whole company would be allowed to use. So the idea was always to make it so that the tool was built in and very, very usable and readily available to all the players, all the schedulers. Because of course, to get a reliable and consistent schedule requires a reasonable amount of skill and knowledge on P6, and you don't always have that within your group necessarily. You're getting schedules maybe from many different players, project participants, and their skill level could be all over the place. So there's a bunch of reasons why having a tool like this goes a long way. So the other thing that we found is in many of the organizations we worked with, it was the senior scheduler who would do the critiquing. And if that person was very busy, they wouldn't be able to do as thorough a job. So some schedules kind of didn't get all the attention that they needed. That was another big thing, why we wanted to build a tool that was more readily available to all the players. Not, again, not some very expensive third-party add-on. And then what we found was as we started to work with different clients, certain clients wanted to look at whether the activity IDs were named well, or they wanted to go further than just, is the logic good in the schedule? So being able to do more kind of critiquing and analysis well beyond what's in any external system, that's really another thing that came to light. And I've already mentioned this, getting expensive third-party consultants as well as software tools was a real roadblock to doing a good job of the schedule critiquing. So that's really why we put together P6-QA. So I think what you're going to see when we're going to show the tool to you live is it's very easy to use. You don't need a huge amount of coaching. It's readily available to all the people using P6. So again, you don't need a bottleneck and other software tools per se. And the tool is able to grow with you, okay? So if you start with maybe 4 or 5 things you want to critique and you want to grow as your team gets stronger, or maybe you take on more complicated projects, the tool can do that with you. Those are some of the benefits that I think you're going to see when we run through the tool. So how does it work? So the premise is quite simple. So you get the software, and you need to get a little consulting when you get the software, because we're going to help you deploy the validations that your team wants. So usually everyone is looking for some schedule quality analysis, and that usually centers around the activities with the logic. So we're looking for missing logic. We're looking for the types of logic that you've put into the schedule, whether they've got leads, which are negative, lags and or lags. And we're trying to see whether the durations are consistent, or do you have kind of a hodgepodge with a bunch of short activities and some super long ones, right? That usually gives you a good indication that there's not enough detail in some parts of the schedule, and there needs to be a bit more detail to mitigate any potential risks. So schedule quality is there, and we'll look at constraints. We'll also look at resources and costs. So that's items that we've got in P6 that we can critique. And of course, once you start updating the project, you want to be critiquing the updating. Okay, so I'm going to run through those different facets. I'm going to show you real examples and how it works. So there's lots of different industry standards out in the marketplace. There's lots of them. And our tool will adhere to a lot of pieces within many of them, okay? And then it lets you go beyond that because you can introduce your own critiquing. So I think that's the benefit that you'll find with P6-QA, okay? So if you have some standards to adhere to, reach out because we probably have 95% of it covered in what we've already built. Now, when I say we can go further, that's what we call business process metrics that we can monitor, that we can look at. And we've got them at different layers. So we will look at project level, activity level, resource expense, and we can look at step level information as well. Okay, so that's another thing with QA. So it's not just buying what's there. We can include and create additional quality checks. Okay, so again, that's why it goes beyond what you can get in the market for different analysis. Now, the other thing that it does is it lets you create standards that are flexible because not every project is going to require the same critiquing. Okay, a shutdown turnaround project where you've got a short window of time with lots and lots of man hours of work going to take place, that needs a different critiquing than a capital project that might go on for 5, 10, even 100 years. We've got a client with a 100-year project. So you need different things depending on the type of project, and our tool lets you do that very, very easily and very consistently. And that includes the different kinds of projects that your team may take on. Okay, so you might have IT projects all the way through to construction projects. So the tool is very flexible, including the phases that you're at. Okay, so the level of critiquing may vary. You might have a little more flexibility when you're early on in the proposal planning stage, and you might need to tighten up the critiquing once it's approved and you're in execution. So the tool lets you use it at any phase of the project and any different kind of project that you want to look at. Okay, good. So let me go ahead and I'm going to jump into the software and show you how it works. Okay, so I am using the P6 client, and I'm going to use this tool to show you how P6-QA works. But if your team uses the web component of P6, it will work in there as well. Okay, so we're heavily reliant on things that you probably use already, project layouts, activity layouts, resource assignment layouts, etc. So we're very reliant on base P6 functionality to do the heavy lifting for us, okay? So again, the learning curve for QA is not steep at all because we're taking advantage of P6 functionality for the bulk of it. And most recently, we've been putting more and more of the data in P6 that QA is monitoring and putting it out into our P6 Reporter tool, which lets us build dashboards off of it. Okay, so I will show you a few samples of some Power BI dashboards using P6-QA data. Okay, so let's look at Let's look at the let me explain to you what you're looking at right now. So on the screen right now is a bunch of different projects that I have in P6. And the projects, for the most part, you can see already have some metrics, okay, some little flagging going on, okay? So I'm going to remove a few of those just to give you an idea of how this works, okay? So if you had a brand new schedule, it would look something more like this, okay, where it had no critique done on it as of yet. And sorry, I already did this, but must have rerun it. Okay, here we go. So you would start off with a clean slate. And of course, you want the computer, you want P6-QA to actually look at what's in the schedule and give you some feedback. So we have a variety of things that we're going to look at. Okay, so let me explain a few of those. So we have a high duration flag, and you can see that quite a few of these projects have high duration projects. Some of them are good. Okay, then we have high float. So again, same thing. Some of them have problems with high float, and some of them are good. So we're looking at logic missing, so activities that are missing predecessors and or successors. So we're monitoring both of them, and then we've got a totaling up type of flag for you. And then when you're looking at relationships, logic, the sequencing of work, people may use leads and lags. So negative lags is what a lead is, and positive lag is what's a lag. Now, they might also have long lags, okay? So with quite a big duration on the lag, which shifts the activities, okay? So we're monitoring all those. We can look at those and we can see whether we've got a clean schedule or whether we've got some problems with them. Okay, so again, we've got a variety of things going on. Some of the projects are good and some need some additional critiquing. So these are what we call different schedule quality metrics. Okay, we're also looking at constraints. We're looking at different logic types. Okay, so that's pretty common. Most of all those industry standards are going to want to look at your schedule quality build. So I can run P6-QA whenever I want. Okay, so I can have the computer run it manually, which is what I'm going to do in a minute. We can do it weekly, monthly, etc. Okay, and not every project has to be having P6-QA run on it. So I have the option to say, yes, let me run it on this project, or no. Okay, so let me go ahead and run it on this one project. And I'm going to do it manually. Okay, so I'm going to let the computer know it's a manual run. And I can do it anytime I want by clearing out the last run date, which lets P6-QA know that I want to actually rerun it at that point. Okay, so that's how I would do it if I'm going to run it manually. If I'm going to run it weekly, it would be preset to run at a certain time of the week. So perhaps you want to run it every Saturday, for example. Okay. Now, this should run, and the speed at which it runs is going to depend on how big your project is and whether you've run it before. Okay, so that was super fast. It's a very small project that I have. And of course, you saw that it had been run before. Okay, so for a large project, so I've run it on 10,000-ish activity projects, and it took less than 15 minutes to run it. Okay, so it's pretty quick. And again, you can run it and you can keep working on other projects, etc. Now, you might say, well, how does it know what is a high duration, what is a high float? So there's got to be some criteria on the back of this, and there is. Okay, so I'm going to open my criteria layout so you can see how I've told the computer what fits for a high duration or a high float, okay? Now, the criteria comes in usually two different formats. The first and foremost is, what is a high value? Not everything is a high value. Some of them are just a pass or a fail. So does it have logic? Yes or no? So that would be a pass or a fail. But for a criteria that also has a range, we would put in the range that we're targeting. Okay, so in this example, we're saying that something that's more than 960 hours, which generally is an 8-hour day, so anything above that would be tagged as a high duration, okay? Now, in the next version we're releasing shortly, we're also going to actually let you see the variances, okay? So not only will we flag the activity, we're also going to record the variance. And it's going to start to allow for even more data gathering and critiquing, okay? So that'll be the version coming shortly. So it should be before the end of the year. But for now, we monitor the particular item, and then we also say what constitutes a flag at the project level, okay? So we saw 3 different flags, and we're using out-of-the-box functions in P6. So we've got the stop sign, the yield sign, and the green check mark. Now, on this project, I'm saying I have 0 tolerance. So as soon as I have a high duration, it gets a red stop sign. But on this project, it's saying 2% or worse would hit the red flag. Okay, so if I have 3 activities out of 100, this would get a red flag. But if I only had 1, I'd be okay. Okay, if I had 2, I'd be in the red, right, Sue? I think 2 hits the red. If not, it's green because it's okay still. Okay, I think it's going to hit the red though. So it's a percentage that we're looking at there. Okay, so we set up the criteria in here. So that's how I can have a different criteria depending on my project specifics, okay? So if I'm in a turnaround project or shutdown or an outage, those are short time frames. I'm gonna want a much smaller value for high duration. And for a longer project, I would definitely want to allow a bit more flexibility, okay, on a longer duration. So that's how you would set it up. Now, not only do we have schedule quality indicators that we're monitoring, but we also have business process indicators, and we can have statistics that we're looking at as well. Okay, so we've got a lot of different flavors of data that we can monitor. Now, before I start overwhelming you with those, let me actually show you a little bit more detail on what we actually monitored. Okay, so we have a few notebooks that we've put together. So not only can we see the this in a columnar grid format, but we can also see it in a summary level at the project in a notebook. Okay. Now the nice thing about these notebooks is they can be taken out they can be copied and pasted into Word, into an email if you wanted to, so it can be shared. Okay. And you're going to see, I'll show you that we can also share this same sort of data out to a dashboarding tool like Power BI or Tableau. I'll use Power BI in my example, but they can certainly be put into Business Objects, Domo, other tools that are readily available out in the market. And what we're finding is more and more of our clients are using those, so we can feed P6 into the mix quite readily, and P6-QA data as well. So we can see this in a bit more detail, okay? And so we can see what is constituting a pass or a fail, and we've got actual counts here. So this would be number of activities that are in the mix for that particular thing that you're looking at, okay? Now I'm looking at business processes. So we're looking at slightly different things than I showed you there a minute ago. These are activity naming, activity ID, data dates, etc. Okay, so we'll touch on those in more detail. And these reports go further. So they explain what the monitors are and give you some examples, okay, of some of the things that are missing the criteria. Now, the details, though, of course, are right in the project. So I can open that project, but I think I'll open this one because it's I've got the layouts attached to that one. Okay, they're pretty darn similar, these projects. And what this one is going to look at is I'm looking at logic. So let's do a little bit deeper dive on the logic. And I'll just make this a little smaller. So what we're seeing is I'm in the activities now. So I'm into the details. And the activities have been flagged. So you can see very readily which one has the problem that was being summarized up to the project level. Okay. So if I have this activity, sorry, let me just see what it is, engineering design, I can see here that some logic is missing. And it's saying that I've got an open end on the predecessor. Now, I can see that down here as well, okay? So this is a very quick flag, so I know exactly what I need to fix. And then, of course, I can assign the predecessor. And when I rerun the QA, it'll take that off as a problem, okay? So for example, I don't know what a proper one would be. Let's go ahead and say project sanction. Let's say we're going to start the engineering as soon as we get project sanction, okay? So this one now should not flag this again, okay? So that's the way that you would use the tool. So you open a layout that has the criteria you want to look at, you fix the problem areas, okay, and then you rerun it. So I can rerun it at any time. And so I could just go here and I can say I want to rerun it. I can clear that out. And I can start refreshing. And the clue that it's actually run is when it fills in the date. So it lets me know the last time it ran it. Okay, so that's handy. Now I can wait for it or I could continue working. Now in my case, of course, I made just one change, so it's quite simple. And there you go. The flag is fixed, okay? Now you wouldn't probably make one fix and run it, but just for the sake of demoing, just to give you a flavor of how this works. So the nice thing here is that, you know, if you have a young scheduler who's just starting out in their career and they may not be totally familiar and you're trying to bring them up to speed, this is a way that they can critique their work, okay? They can do some of their schedule development, they could run the analysis and they can fix the problems. And then if there's something they're not totally sure of, they can ask you for some help. Or, you know, you as the senior scheduler can have this dashboard up and you can see very quickly, okay, they've still got some problems here and maybe I should set up a coaching session with them, okay? So the thing really changes the dynamic of your scheduling group. It's a big change, much more responsibility, much more self-critiquing available. And you don't have to wait for the end of the month when you're trying to get all your reports out to fix your schedule up. Okay, so I gave you one very simple example, but we have a lot of additional items inside of here that we're monitoring, okay? So we're monitoring a float, okay? Now float often comes with a logic missing. It's not always, but it could well mean that there's logic missing. Now I can see here, it's not that there's logic missing in that case, okay? So this is probably, in this example, it's a level of effort activity. So that's probably why it's got that, okay? Now, you might notice we've got a few here that have a blue star. So what we let you do as a user of P6-QA, you look at this and you say, well, this is a finish milestone. Okay, I can see here there's no successors, and I can tell it's a finish milestone from here. So it's not that surprising that it's missing a logic tie. Okay, so we don't give someone a red X when they miss a logic tie on a finish milestone, but we put it as a warning. So you can critique it as the person using the system, okay? So if you know that you've looked at it and you're okay with that, having an open end, you can flag it. And of course, the open end on the front, meaning a predecessor is missing, or the back, meaning a successor is missing, you would also want to say, it's okay that I've got a gap in the logic, okay? So we allow you to manage the flagging, okay? So it's not just one way or not at all. You get to intervene, you get to give your feedback. So P6-QA knows that this is all right, okay? So you don't keep getting a red check mark on milestones as an example. So that's how that works. And you can do that throughout the system on the different monitoring, okay? So if you've looked at this float and you understand why it's high float, you can flag it, okay? And you got to be a little careful with some of those because they may be legitimately things you want to be monitoring, okay? So go tread a little cautiously on putting blue flags on every problem, because then of course you're losing the benefit of the tool. Now, let's look at some of the business processes that we were monitoring. Okay, so not only did we have some schedule quality areas that needed some improvement, we have some business process ones. So let's talk about those a little more so you can get a feel for the types of things that we can do inside P6-QA. So business processes and client-specific ones are often monitoring items that go beyond just the schedule, okay? So for example, we've got the ability to monitor codes, okay? So something that we don't have, unfortunately, in P6 is the ability to say a code is mandatory, meaning I need it filled out. Now, you usually need those because you've got reporting, management reporting, or specific reporting that relies on them, okay? So things like a work type or a responsibility are two good examples of things that I really encourage my clients to make sure they have inside of their schedule. So these would be two that I would recommend having across the board and making them mandatory. So what that would mean is if a code is missing, you can monitor that and you can make sure that we get them filled in. Okay, so we've got that inside P6-QA. We monitor activity ID formats and naming conventions. Okay, so if you've ever received a schedule where the activity IDs are not clean, you're trying to sort it, it can be very frustrating. This schedule, if we had engineering design, and engineering design, and we didn't have the work packages and what they were, you'd be very lost on looking at this schedule, okay? So again, those are very valuable items to monitor. And some of the industry standards have those monitors, okay? Not all of them do, okay? So those are some examples. We have a lot of examples here. So we have a lot of monitoring on resources and costs as well. So for example, in here, we're looking at whether a resource also has a role. Okay, so that's what this one is. Do we have any resources without roles? Now, again, you may not use roles, so that would be okay. We wouldn't turn that flag on. But if you're in an organization that does use roles for different grouping, sorting, histogram development, reporting, you want to make sure everything has a role on it. Okay, so in this case, we'd want to make sure we filled that in and we had a role. Okay, so that is how flexible this is, because it's not easy to see these things. Okay, now yes, some of these items we could put a column that's similar in P6 and it might help us, but it won't go to the level of detail that we've gone in P6-QA. Okay, so you would just keep working on them, keep cleaning them up. And again, once you've done that, you can rerun the analysis. So the third piece really that we have is the updating. Okay, so not only do we have planning, critiquing that we need to do, business process critiquing that we need to do, we need to also make sure that we've got tools to monitor and validate what we're receiving once we get updates. Okay, so updates bring their own set of problems with them. So I think we've got an updating criteria. So I'm going to jump to that and take a look at that. So when we get into updating, the things that can start to go wrong would be things like our durations. Durations could start to grow considerably. So we've got monitoring on durations. So is my remaining duration bigger than my original duration? Yes or no? Do I have an actual duration that's bigger than my baseline duration? Yes or no? Is my original duration, and how does it compare to my baseline duration? Okay, so we're starting to look at durations, because of course, if the durations are starting to extend, you usually have a problem starting to take place. Are my activities finishing on time, or are they finishing late? Are my activities updated in a strange way? So is the finish date, have I said that it's got an actual finish before the data date? Yes or no? And or does it have an actual finish date after the data date? So those are things that we're trying to understand. Okay. And then of course, resourcing. We're looking at resourcing. Are our resources using up more effort to achieve the work? And have we updated activities saying they're started and or finished without updating the resources? Okay, so that's pretty weird. And it could just be we've made a mistake, we've missed it. So this is helping you cross-validate things that are not easy to see, especially if you have a large schedule. Okay, so we're monitoring those as well. So let me show you a little bit of that in the details in the activities. So I'll open up this project and I will switch to my updating of layout. Okay, so this is how simple we've made it. So we just moved to a different layout that already has your criteria. And I'm a real big believer in using different layouts. That way I don't make mistakes in building new layouts every time I'm trying to do something. And also I use my time, I think, a bit more efficiently as well. So I've opened up that project and I've grouped my activities a slightly different way. I've grouped them by date. Okay. So in theory, if I'm in 2022, right, all of the stuff up prior to October should have been updated. Okay. Now this is a demo database, so it is a little weird and it's maybe the data is a little stale, but it'll give you the idea of what you can monitor. So as I mentioned, we're monitoring durations. So what I like to do is not only have the field with the flag, but in my layout, I have the two fields it's comparing. So I can see it quite readily. Okay. Now, if you're okay with these durations getting a bit longer, you could take advantage of a few things. We can have a user-defined field that you could put a note in. You could also use notebooks. I'm not sure how often you guys use notebooks, but you can put a notebook in here and put a note in, okay? So that you can keep track of why this is okay. We can look at, so we looked at some durations. Let's look at some other things that we're monitoring. So let's look at this one. So we've got a flag saying that our actual dates are bigger than the data date. So best practice when you do updates is to move the data date to the date up to which you've statused the project. So if I was doing an update up until last Friday, I would move the data date up until last Friday. So that's the best practice. So you shouldn't have anything with an actual start or actual finish after that data date. So let me just refresh your memory. So our data date right now was 15th of May, 2020. So yeah, it's a bit old. And we said this activity started after that data date. So that's a bit weird. Now it can happen. You might be updating Wednesday for up to Friday. So you might have a few activities with a forecast date. But normally I would move my data date to the Friday as well, okay? So it shouldn't be happening. So this gives me a chance to say, oops, no, I just made a mistake here. I picked the wrong date in the calendar. It actually should have been a different date, okay? So it gives you a chance to find those potential data entry mistakes. Now, when you're updating, of course, you're gonna wanna be looking at my float. Okay, so anytime you see negative float, that's a problem because you're starting to show that your activities are falling behind and they won't get done in time. So in this example, this activity is 2 days late, which is not good. Okay, so we want to be looking at that. Now, 2 days late may not be, the end of the world, but if you start to get 4 days late, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that can start to add up. And in a turnaround project, for example, you could be losing production from your plant, could be in the hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of dollars. So can be a big cost. So that's why we're monitoring that. Now, the other thing that's best practice is to, of course, include resources and ideally costs. Okay, so you're trying to do all the points of the project management triangle. Now, if you're just delving into that, you're just starting to get used to using those pieces of P6, then these tools will help you work with those. So we're looking at whether we've started an activity here and whether we did any updates on the resources. So I can see this right here, that no, we missed the updates on the resources. So again, maybe I just forgot to put in my actuals, in which case I can put those in and it will start to monitor that. Now, in this example, I put a value that's below the budget, but it could also be that you're going over the budget, right? So not only would we monitor whether you did the update, but we'll monitor whether you're going over, whether you're trending high, okay? So those are important pieces for you to see and be able to see easily, okay? Now with layouts and such, yes, you can see some of this data, but not so cleanly, and certainly not reporting on it nice and cleanly out through the system, okay? So we let you monitor a huge variety of different quality points. And as I mentioned, you can introduce your own. Okay, so every one of our clients that we've rolled the tool out with, they always have some of their own that they want introduced. So we can do that as well. And you can monitor them and create your own particular reports. Okay, so you don't have to live with what we've got here. These are templates that can be configured for your specific way of reporting. So as an example, we had a client here that wanted to monitor calendars. Now they wanted to make sure that all the calendars started at the same time each day of the week. So that was one of the things that we're monitoring. And in this example, you can see here that we've got some problems potentially. And so we're identifying where the problems are. Now, not only do we have a start time that may not be jiving across all of them, but we might also have a finish time that we want to monitor, okay? So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. And this is monitoring right down to the activity level. Again, this is a simple project for demoing. You can report on this many different ways, okay? So this lets you monitor a variety of different things. Sue, was there any other ones that you think I should bring up that I've missed?
I don't think so.
Okay, perfect, thanks. I'm gonna jump to the Power BI examples as well. So if there is something, we can swing back. So then some of our clients also wanted just straight up statistics. So there's statistics that we can do, counts and whatnot. Okay, so again, very, very flexible and highly configurable. Now, how do we get that data in the hands of other people besides the P6 team? So definitely there will be cases where you want that data to be used by other people who are not P6 folks. So there are folks that could be using different dashboarding systems within your organization. So we have a tool that you can buy together with P6-QA called P6 Reporter. So that tool lets you take snapshots of P6 when you're comfortable with the data. So let's say I do an update this week and I want to snapshot the data, save it. It saves it into a warehouse that we've built. And that warehouse simplifies the way you access P6 data. So if you hired someone to go access P6 data, there's hundreds of tables that join up to give us what we look at in P6. Plus, there's some data that's not even stored in the tables. It's just presented to you when you are in P6. So it's a challenge. It's not an easy job. So we have that reporter tool, and then we've built some examples. Again, food for thought for you to look at. Okay, so I'm going to dive into some of those. So this gives you a dashboard of the DCMA. I'll go to the DCMA here first for many different projects and then many different snapshot windows. Okay, so we can look at all the projects that we have in the portfolio. Maybe I'm working with one contractor, let's say, and these are the projects we're working on together. Or I can turn some of them off, okay? So I can quite readily do that kind of filtering in these dashboarding tools. And in this example, I'm using Power BI. Okay, so this makes it a bit more easier to disperse the data to the right people. So we can produce these tabular formats, and we've got a bunch of different examples, or we can do them for one project and one snapshot. So this is a reporting window that we've done this for. And the benefit of some of these is you can sort them, okay? So you can get the ones that are most problematic at the top, so you can focus in. Now, we don't have a drill down right now, but you can develop drill downs in the system, okay? So it's something we're enhancing as well on our side. So we get more and more of this readily available for you. So it's more plug and play. And then we can do a side-by-side comparison. So in this example, I'm looking at two different windows or reporting windows, two different snapshots, we would call them. And we can see whether we're doing better or worse. So right here, I can see that the missing logic is getting worse from one snapshot to the next. So it's likely that I've added some activities. But I can see some parameters are getting better. So high float is getting better and so on. Getting better, I'm lying, I said it wrong. it's getting worse. Okay, so we want to be monitoring what's going on here. We've obviously made some decisions or mistakes in this last schedule revision. Okay, so that's another way you can look at it. And we've got some different ways for us to examine what's going on with a project. So again, we just saw this, that all of a sudden the logic was getting worse. So you can see that example here. And so there's just different ways to look at the data as well. Okay. These are more or less the same thing. They're just the different standards out in the industry that you can look at. So different ways of looking at that data and the business process items that we looked at. So let's see what else. Okay, so I think those are good. Now let me come up here to some other ways of looking at the data. So another way of looking at the data is not only do I want to see, the overall of what's going on here, I want to get an idea of the number of activities that are in the mix or the number of relationships that are in the mix. So we've got sort of two different metrics. So in this case, I can see quite readily that for the most part, the logic is not too bad. We've got a few areas of concern, of course, here. Here, when we're looking at the activities, well, again, we've got some that are need definitely more investigation. This high duration, we're more than half. So that's definitely something of concern. So we don't want to dig into that. We want to get maybe a bit more detail into that schedule, okay? So these are other ways you can look at the data. And we're building more examples just to get it more visual, okay? Now, this doesn't give me the whole picture. Understanding what time frame those activities are in can also bring a lot of important information, okay? If they're mostly at the front of the schedule, it would tell me that I've got, maybe that's okay, because sometimes the engineering activities are a little bit longer. But if they're at the back of the schedule where the construction is taking place, that would give me a good indication that we don't have enough detail. And the chance of activities that are further away from you changing a fair bit is high. So we want to definitely critique that, okay? We also want to critique whether activities have so much logic that updating this schedule is going to be very painful, okay? So that's what this one is helping us see. So average number of predecessors per activity, okay? Now this isn't too bad. On average, 2 to 4 logic ties per activity is quite reasonable. When you start to hit into 6, 8, 10, 12, you're starting to get into something that's got so much logic in it, it could be very problematic updating, okay? So this is starting to give us other metrics that will be helpful in getting a better feeling for whether this schedule is going to be strong or whether it's still got some gaps and weaknesses in it. Float, of course, is another thing we want to be looking at. And we can see here we've got some activities with a lot of floats. So this is thousands of days of floats. We need to be looking at that because that's not normal. So it could well be that we've got more work on open ends taking place. It could well be that they've used a lot of erroneous activity types to build their schedule, like level of efforts. Okay, so again, this is just giving us more detail, more information on where we need to prod, what we need to fix, okay? And then we can do the same sort of thing with updated activities. So activities that have actual durations that are a lot bigger than the original duration. Okay, so we're starting to see that we do have durations across the schedule. So not just at the front, but across, that are starting to get bigger. Now that's important because that is likely a good trend to let you know you're going to probably have some claims and disputes on your hands. And so you better be watching those, okay? So the next layer of detail would be to do this by phase. You know, which ones were engineering, which ones were construction, which ones were certain disciplines. So do I have problems in mechanical, electrical, etc.? Okay, so this is where we can bring more and more dashboarding, helping you understand those areas. Okay. Okay, so I think I've given you an overview. Sue, James, is there anything jumping out at you that I missed before we go to wrap up? And I don't see any questions so far, so hopefully that means it's pretty clear. What do you think? Did I miss anything?
No.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
It's all good to me.
Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'll jump back to the PowerPoint and we'll wrap up the webinar. And we'll give you a chance to ask some questions here. Okay. So let's talk about some of the feedback that our clients have given us on what they felt some of the benefits were, the return on investment that they made in the tool. So we sell P6-QA on a subscription basis, and we sell it not based on the user, but based on the number of things that you want to monitor. Okay, so our standard package lets you monitor 250,000 items. So it's reasonable. But of course, larger organizations might need more. So we've got a corporate package and we've got a, in between, we have a professional package. So the investment could range from a few $100s to a bit more into the higher hundreds and thousands, but it could be for, sorry, someone's, you guys want to mute? Depending on the size of your organization. So a large organization, you're still getting pennies on each point that you're monitoring. Now, in terms of the user feedback, so we've got some good feedback on it. Okay, so we had folks using the tool that were not full-time schedulers, finance people, and site folks that were intaking the schedules, running the QA, and they could give the feedback to the contractor quite quickly with the different reports that you've seen. Now that's important because if you're getting an update and the update has a bunch of problems in it, you know, you want to get the contractor to revisit that and get it resubmitted quickly. And then, of course, in terms of the ability to improve standards within the group, really takes a load off the senior scheduler and allows the team all to pull their own weight, because now they know what the senior scheduler would be looking for in their side spreadsheets that they probably made over the years. Okay, so this really helps raise the bar and the standards within the group. And then the ability to critique very quickly. Okay, and not only just basic things that you might be able to do yourself in P6, but you can go a lot further, which is beneficial. So you can see the problems very fast, and you can see the critical path problems very quickly. Now, this speed is the one that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so validate thousands and thousands of activities schedule. And this was my client in less than 2 hours. So this was a project in New York City, in Manhattan, a $600 million project. The person I was working with was the CFO. He didn't know scheduling. Okay, so he got us to critique his schedule. I spent less than 2 hours critiquing it with P6-QA, and I could tell him that his coding was weak. His critical path was non-consistent. He had a huge number of open ends, and he was able to go back to the contractor literally within a day and say, look, that update, that schedule is not good enough. You need to make all these improvements. Okay, so his investment was very small on that very, very expensive project. Okay, so the benefit is very, very easy to realize when you can critique the schedule that quickly. If I didn't have that, if I didn't have the tool, it would have taken me at least a week to try and understand what was going inside that schedule. Okay, so that's really the benefit. It really saves a huge amount of time. Okay, good. So I still, is there a question? Let's see. Okay, earlier you mentioned the Power BI function stores your linked schedule on the server. Is this a server run by Microsoft within Power BI or run by Emerald? Okay, so that's a good question. So these are two different tools. So we have P6-QA, and then we use another one of our tools, P6 Reporter. P6 Reporter stores the data in what we call our data warehouse. Now, where does that sit? So it won't probably sit up in Microsoft, not likely. It could sit inside your environment if your P6 is in there. Let's say you've got your P6 possibly out in the Oracle cloud. So then we could host that data warehouse either within your organization, or it could be at Emerald's cloud as well. So it can be a few different ways. And then that is what feeds into Power BI, which is probably up on Microsoft's 365 environment, okay? And then you can share those Power BI dashboards to other folks, okay? So let's say you're an engineering company, you may work with many clients, so you could have a different space for each of the clients, and you can secure that, and then they just have access to their own dashboards. But you can use the data warehouse that might have many clients' data in it, okay? But you just take different filtering, if you will, out to the Power BI. So hopefully that answered it, and I'm just going to write it in here. Now, if you also host your P6 in Microsoft's environment, you could put the data warehouse there as well. Okay, so it sort of depends on how you're set up. Okay, any other questions coming to mind? Okay, well, if you don't have any more coming to mind right now, that's fine. Hopefully you saw something of interest, and you got a feel for the potential within your group. As I mentioned, this is just one of many tools that Emerald has, and it's really, we've got such a broad set of tools because we've been a company for a long time, and prior to that I was consulting in claims and disputes, so I had a good idea of the sort of things that we need to manage. So we've been in the business for 28 years, and we have had programmers on the team from the beginning. So we've specialized in integrations, obviously software tools like this. I've mentioned the reporter tool, but we also have others that you should explore on our webinar page, okay? So we've got updating tools, caps and taps. We have the calculator tool that lets you do all sorts of automations. And I did a webinar this morning, so you can certainly watch that one or sign up for an upcoming webinar. So we've got a lot of different tools to explore. Another one that's a great seller is our loader tool, our P6 loader. So that lets you load data from Excel into P6, and much broader than the importing you've got out of the box. And it lets you take the data out as well. Again, much broader and much more simplistic than what you can do out of the box. Okay, so explore some of those tools because they are very, very cost effective. And, you know, we're talking about pennies per monitoring item. And if it even saves you one problem on your project, you can recoup that investment. So I'm also going to put my email in there. So if you do have some questions that come up, you can send them to Sue. Donna is, of course, on the line, and she's in your closer to you if you're in the Philippines, as she is. And you've got my email there too. So certainly if there's something that comes to mind, you want to explore how this could work for your team, you have certain things that you're monitoring and you're not sure whether it could fit, reach out to us and let us, we can start to see whether there's ways we can help you. And of course, if you answer this question, if there is something that you would like us to do on follow-up, this just helps us make sure we're following up appropriately with you, okay? So that's just helpful for us. Okay, good. So I think we've done mostly everything that hopefully we've given you a good overview and given you some food for thought. And hopefully you found the hour you spent with us worthwhile. So have a fantastic day. I think I'll stop the recording here.